It was the suddenness of it that hit me the hardest. One moment, everything was normal. Well, as normal as it gets in a house where my dad always found some way to be unhappy. And then the next, he was holding my laptop like it was some kind of dangerous weapon, his face twisted with anger. I had no idea what was going on. I'd spent the whole day at school, got in trouble for not handing in an essay on time, and had even gotten a note from Mrs. Miller. It wasn't even that bad. She just said I was distracted, which, okay, sure I was. But distracted doesn't deserve this. Emily, my dad's voice was like a jolt of ice water. Get in here now. I'd never heard him sound like that before. Usually, when he yelled, it was because I was out of line, or he was pissed off about something minor, like the dishes or my attitude. But this wasn't just yelling. There was something else in his voice, something more desperate. I don't know why I walked in. Maybe I was just curious, or maybe I was just used to always trying to figure out what mood he was in. But when I stepped into the living room and saw him holding my computer, the one he had bought me after all my begging, his face was a mask of something I couldn't even recognize. It wasn't just anger. It was like he had snapped. "Dad," I asked, unsure whether I should approach or just leave. "What are you?" "Shut up. Just shut up, Emily," he screamed, cutting me off. His hands clenched around the laptop like he was holding onto a grenade, like he was about to throw it at me. And the thing is, in that moment, I wasn't sure he wouldn't. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and there was this frantic energy in him, like he was seeing something I couldn't, like he was in some kind of fever dream. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have any clue?" I stood frozen. I mean, he had never talked to me like this. My dad was a gruff man, sure, but this was something new, something darker. "What are you talking about?" I could barely get the words out. My brain couldn't catch up with what was happening. One second, I was dealing with school stress, and the next this. This asterisk, he said, waving the laptop in the air, his face twisted with fury. "This piece of garbage you've been hiding behind. You think I don't know what you're doing on this thing? I saw it. I saw everything." My stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" "I've been watching you, Emily. For weeks," he said, his voice shaking now, but not in a way that made me feel sorry for him. It was like he was unraveling before my eyes, becoming something different. "You think you can hide in your room, be all secretive, not tell me where you're going, what you're doing, who you're talking to, and just pretend everything's fine?" His voice was rising again. "Well, guess what? It's not fine. It's not fine." I stood there, unable to speak. The way he was going on about it made me feel like I was about to be punished for something way worse than not doing a couple of homework assignments. Something deeper. Something secret. He threw the laptop down onto the coffee table, the sound of it slamming against the wood making my heart jump. I couldn't even look at it. My whole body felt numb. "Do you know what you've been doing to this family? To me?" Dad's voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl. "You think I don't see what you're really up to? You think I don't see how you have been slipping away from me, from this family, every time you hide behind that screen of yours? What about me, huh? What about us? You think I don't care?" I opened my mouth to say something, to explain that it wasn't like that I had nothing to hide, but he cut me off before I could get the words out. "No, no more lies, Emily. No more games," he snapped, his eyes now narrowing like a hunter tracking its prey. "I'm done." "What are you doing, Dad?" I whispered, the panic starting to seep into my voice. This wasn't a conversation anymore. This was something else. "Please, I don't understand." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked to the door, his heavy footsteps echoing throughout the house. I could barely move as he opened it and stepped outside, his grip still tight on the handle of the computer. "I'm taking this. You'll never use it again. You don't deserve it." Before I could even protest, he was out the door, and I was left standing in the middle of the living room, my mind spinning, my chest tight with something I couldn't name. What had just happened? Why had he snapped like that? I couldn't process it all. I just stood there, staring at the door he had slammed shut behind him. The sound of my heartbeat was the only thing I could hear, and the only thing I could think of was, I had to get that computer back. Whatever it took, I needed to find out what the hell had just triggered my dad to lose it like this. I needed answers. But where the hell was I supposed to start? The next few days felt like I was living in a nightmare. It wasn't just that my dad had taken my laptop, it was everything that followed after. I tried to go about my usual routine, but it was impossible to focus. Everywhere I looked, there was this constant, nagging fear that something was wrong. I couldn't shake the image of my dad's face when he shouted at me. The look in his eyes. It was like I wasn't even his daughter anymore. I couldn't understand it. I didn't know how to fix it. At school, it was just as bad. Mrs. Miller kept giving me looks like she was waiting for some explanation, and I didn't have one. I couldn't tell her that my dad had flipped out over something that felt completely out of left field. I couldn't tell anyone, not because I was embarrassed, but because I didn't even know what had set him off in the first place. What had changed? Was it really just the stupid note from school? I couldn't concentrate on anything, my mind wandering back to the situation at home. That's when things started to get even worse. It was Friday night when my dad came into my room again. I had been sitting at my desk, staring at a blank piece of paper, trying and failing to write a report for history class, when he knocked. I didn't even have time to prepare myself. He stepped in without waiting for me to answer. His expression was unreadable, and I instantly felt the tension in the air. There was something in the way he was standing that felt off. Like he had a plan. "Emily," he said, his voice strained, quieter than usual, but there was something underlying it that made me freeze. It wasn't anger this time. It wasn't even frustration. It was something colder, something far more unsettling. "We need to talk." I didn't know what to say. There was so much running through my head, but I couldn't put it into words. Instead, I just nodded, trying to hide the way my palms were sweating. He walked in, closed the door softly behind him, and sat down on the edge of my bed. I waited. I didn't trust myself to speak first. Not after everything that had happened. Not after how he had looked at me that night when he took my computer. He didn't look at me right away, and the silence stretched between us. I could hear my own breathing. It felt like the air was too thick, too heavy. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low. "I've been thinking a lot about what you've been doing," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine. "What's been happening with you and your habits?" I didn't know what he was talking about. "What habits?" I asked, the confusion creeping into my voice despite my best effort to stay calm. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," he replied, his voice rising now. "The way you've been disappearing into your room, not coming down for dinner, hiding behind that damn screen every chance you get, sneaking around like you're some kind of criminal. What do you think that does to me? To us? We're supposed to be a family." I felt a sharp sting of guilt, but it wasn't for the reasons he thought. I wasn't hiding anything from him. I wasn't sneaking around. But the way he spoke, it was like he didn't even know me anymore. "I wasn't hiding from you," I said quietly, the words barely leaving my lips. "I was doing my homework, trying to catch up. You know how it is. I'm not doing anything wrong." "Lies," he spat, his voice harsh, and that was when I saw it. That thing I had been sensing, the thing I couldn't place in his eyes earlier. He was angry, yes, but it was more than just anger. It was like he wasn't talking to me anymore. It was like I was a stranger sitting in front of him, someone he didn't understand, someone he couldn't reach. And that was terrifying. "I don't think you understand what's happening here," he continued, standing up and walking around my room like a caged animal. "This isn't just about your grades or your little games. This is about you losing yourself. You've been changing, Emily, and I don't know how to stop it. You're slipping away from me." I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. How could I argue with that? How could I tell him that I wasn't the one changing, that he was the one who was acting like a completely different person? That wasn't something I could say out loud. I wasn't even sure I fully understood it yet. His voice dropped, softer but more dangerous now. "You think I don't see what you've been doing? The people you've been talking to." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "What do you mean? What people?" "The people online, Emily," he said, his words sharp now. "The people who are filling your head with nonsense. I saw the messages. I saw the things you've been doing when you think I'm not looking. Don't think I don't know." I felt like I had been slapped. I could feel my pulse racing, my thoughts flying around in circles. I didn't understand what he was talking about. Who had he seen? What messages? "I don't know what you're talking about," I whispered, my voice cracking with the effort to stay calm. "You think I didn't see you talking to that guy?" he snapped, his eyes wide now with disbelief. "I saw the messages, Emily. Don't lie to me." The words hit me like a punch. "What guy?" I said, shaking my head, my hands suddenly cold and shaking. "I don't know who you're talking about. I haven't been talking to anyone." He took a deep breath, clearly trying to control his rage, but it didn't work. He stepped forward, closing the distance between us. "Don't you dare lie to me. I saw the messages. I know what you're up to. You're involved in something that's going to tear this family apart." I was trembling now. My heart was racing, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Dad, I swear to you, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't talked to anyone. No one. You're. Stop lying to me, he screamed, cutting me off. I've had enough of your lies, your secrecy, and your little games. It's over, Emily. You're done. I backed away, feeling my legs shaking beneath me. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get away, but I couldn't. I couldn't move, couldn't escape the weight of his words. I had no idea where this was coming from, but I knew one thing for sure. The man standing in front of me wasn't my dad anymore. The person I had known and loved, he was gone. And in his place was someone who didn't know me, who couldn't even see me anymore. I'm going to make sure you understand, Emily, he said, his voice low again. I'm going to make you see exactly what you've been doing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight back, to tell him the truth, but nothing felt real anymore. How had everything gone so wrong? And where had this stranger in my father's body come from? The following days were a blur of confusion and tension. I could feel the walls closing in on me, the pressure in our house unbearable. My dad didn't speak to me at all after that night. He didn't even look at me. Every time I saw him, he was cold, distant, like I wasn't even there. It felt like a silent punishment that was worse than anything he could have said out loud. I tried to go to school, to pretend like everything was normal, but my mind was consumed by the growing fear that something was seriously wrong. I hadn't realized just how much my world had tilted until I saw the message from my friend Liz. It was a simple text, a single line of words, but the moment I read it, everything shifted. I don't know what's going on with you and your dad, but I think I know someone who might be able to help. I stared at the screen, feeling a knot form in my stomach. I had no idea what Liz meant by that. For days, I had been isolating myself, trying to make sense of the chaos at home, but I hadn't even realized Liz had noticed something was off. I'd been so consumed by my own fears, I didn't stop to think about anyone else. But now, with one text, my entire world was thrown into a different light. I didn't waste any time. I responded quickly, almost desperate, asking her to tell me what she knew. Her reply came within minutes. Asterisk, meet me at the old library after school today. I'll explain everything. Asterisk. I didn't hesitate. The moment school was over, I made my way to the library, the walk feeling like it took forever. My heart was racing with anticipation and dread. What was going on? What had Liz found out? And how did she know so much about what was happening with my dad? When I arrived, Liz was waiting for me outside the building, her face serious, a stark contrast to the usual easygoing smile she always wore. She pulled me aside quickly, away from anyone who might overhear. Okay, listen, Liz said, her voice low and urgent. I don't know how much you know, but I've been hearing things. Things I think you need to know. I've been digging around, talking to some people. I don't want to scare you, but I think there's something going on with your dad that, well, it's not just about you. This has been happening for a while, Emily. I felt a chill run down my spine as I took a step back, trying to process her words. What do you mean? What do you know? Liz took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the surroundings before she continued. It's not just that he's been acting weird. It's like something's been messing with his head for months now. I found out that he's been seeing someone, a therapist or some kind of counselor. I frowned. So? That doesn't mean anything. People see therapists all the time. No, it's not that simple, she said quickly, shaking her head. This guy, his name is Dr. Ross. He's been telling your dad all sorts of things. He's been making him question everything. I think he's even been trying to manipulate him. There's something about the way he's been acting, Emily. I can't put my finger on it, but there's definitely something wrong. I couldn't speak for a moment. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. My dad, the man who had always been so sure of himself, so resolute in his beliefs, was being manipulated by some therapist? It didn't make sense. Why would he even go to some guy like that? I finally asked, my voice shaky. Liz shrugged, her face darkening. I don't know, but whatever it is, it's changing him. Have you noticed how he's been talking about, well, everything? How he's been seeing things that aren't even there. That's what people do when they've been manipulated. They lose touch with reality. And I think that's what's happening with your dad. I couldn't process it. None of this made sense. Was Liz really saying that my dad was being controlled by someone? The idea felt insane, but deep down, something told me that maybe, just maybe, there was some truth to what she was saying. I didn't know why my dad would listen to a therapist he barely knew, let alone one who was apparently influencing him to behave so erratically. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like everything clicked into place. I had to find out more about this Dr. Ross. I need to know everything, I said, my voice firm. Where do I even start? Liz looked at me seriously. We need to find out who this guy really is. I don't trust him, not for a second. And if he's behind what's been happening to your dad, then you're going to need more than just me. You're going to need help from someone who knows how to dig deeper. I think I know someone who can help us with that. I stared at her, confused. Who? My cousin, Liz said, almost whispering now. He's into hacking and all that stuff. He's good at finding things on the internet. Stuff that's buried deep, stuff people don't want you to know. I was hesitant, but something inside me told me this was the only way to get answers. Okay, let's do it. Let's find out who this Dr. Ross really is. That night, Liz sent me a message with her cousin's number. His name was Tyler, and she warned me he was a bit unpredictable. But at that point, I didn't care. I was desperate for answers. I called him the next day, and after a few minutes of awkward small talk, Tyler promised to look into Dr. Ross. I wasn't sure how long it would take, but I had to trust that he would be able to find something. Anything. The hours dragged on, my mind racing with possibilities. What had Dr. Ross been telling my dad? What had he said to make him act the way he had? But all I could do now was wait. Wait for Tyler's call. Wait for some sort of sign that maybe, just maybe, I was about to uncover the truth behind all of this madness. The days after my conversation with Liz and the call to Tyler felt like they dragged on forever. My thoughts were a mess, constantly cycling through what I had learned. Every night, I would sit in my room, staring at my phone, waiting for Tyler to call, for something, anything, that would finally make sense of all this. The unease in my chest grew with each passing hour. What if Tyler couldn't find anything? What if I was just grasping at straws, hoping for a miracle that would never come? Then, 3 days later, my phone buzzed in the middle of the night. I jolted upright in bed, my heart hammering in my chest as I grabbed it. The name on the screen was Tyler's. Hello. My voice was breathless, like I had been holding my breath for too long. Emily, it's Tyler, came his voice, calm but with an edge of something dark. We need to talk. You're going to want to sit down for this. I felt a wave of dread wash over me, but I nodded anyway, even though I knew he couldn't see me. What did you find? Is it about Dr. Ross? Yeah, it's about him. But it's more complicated than you think. He paused, and I could hear him clicking something on the other end, probably his keyboard. I did some digging like we talked about, and here's the thing. Dr. Ross isn't just some therapist. He's not some guy your dad just walked into. He's got a whole history, Emily. A history you won't like. I could barely breathe, but I forced myself to stay still, waiting for him to continue. Dr. Ross isn't just a counselor, Tyler went on. He's part of a network. There's been talk about his method, the way he counsels people. He's not working alone, Emily. This guy is manipulating people on a larger scale, and your dad's caught in it. I felt my stomach drop. What are you saying? What does this have to do with my dad? Tyler sighed heavily, as if he was about to drop a bomb. He's part of something bigger, Emily. Dr. Ross isn't just about therapy. He's involved with a group that preys on people's vulnerabilities, people like your dad, people who are looking for answers, looking for something to fix them. The way he works is by getting people to sever ties with their families, to push them away. He isolates them, and that's when he steps in, offering guidance. It's all a power game. My mind was racing. No way. That can't be true. My dad isn't like that. Tyler's voice was firm. I'm telling you, Emily, it's true. And here's the kicker. Dr. Ross has a history of causing these kinds of splits. He's been kicked out of multiple practices, fired from hospitals. But he always finds someone who's vulnerable enough to listen, and once he's in, he doesn't let go. Your dad's just the latest victim. I was silent, trying to process his words, trying to convince myself this wasn't real. But deep down, I knew it was. The pieces were falling into place, even though I didn't want to admit it. So what do we do now? I asked, the desperation creeping into my voice. You're going to have to confront him, Tyler said. You need to get your dad out of this situation before it's too late. You have to show him what's really happening. But be careful. This is dangerous. People like Dr. Ross don't like being exposed. The fear in his voice was enough to make me hesitate. But I couldn't back down now. My dad was being pulled into something that was tearing him apart, and I wasn't going to stand by and let it happen. The next day, after school, I decided it was time to face my dad. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to make him see the truth. But even as I steeled myself for the confrontation, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of my mind. What if Tyler was wrong? What if I was wrong? But there was no time to question it any further. I had to do this. When I got home, I found my dad sitting at the kitchen table, his face buried in a stack of papers. He looked up as I entered, his eyes still distant. But there was something else there, something I couldn't quite place. The coldness had faded, replaced by a kind of exhaustion, like he was weighed down by something he couldn't carry anymore. I took a deep breath and walked up to him, standing in front of him with all the courage I could muster. "Dad," I said, my voice steady but my heart pounding. "We need to talk." His eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't say anything. I could tell he was bracing for another argument. But this time, I wasn't going to back down. "I know about Dr. Ross," I said, watching his reaction closely. "I know what he's doing to you. And I know he's not helping you. He's manipulating you." My dad froze. For a moment, he didn't respond. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. I could see the conflict brewing in his eyes, but it wasn't enough. He didn't believe me yet. "Emily, you don't understand," he said finally, his voice low. "You don't know what you're talking about." I shook my head. "No, you don't understand. I've been talking to people. People who know what's going on. Dr. Ross isn't a therapist. He's not helping you. He's controlling you." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face twisted in anger. "You don't know anything about him. He's helping me. He's making me better. You're just upset because you don't get it." I stood my ground, my voice growing louder with every word. "No, you've changed, and it's not because of anything you're doing. It's because of him. He's turning you against everyone who cares about you. He's making you push us all away." For a long moment, we just stood there, glaring at each other. I could see his face reddening, his fists clenching at his sides, and for a moment, I thought he might explode. But then, his anger faltered. His expression shifted, his eyes becoming dull, almost empty. "I'm sorry, Emily," he said quietly, his voice cracking. I didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I was helping myself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't the man who had raised me, the man who had always been so sure of himself, so confident. This was a broken, defeated man, torn apart by someone who had taken everything from him. I stepped forward slowly, trying not to break down myself. "It's not too late, Dad. We can fix this. But you have to come back to us. You have to trust me." He looked at me, his eyes filled with tears for the first time in a long time, and I realized then that there was still a part of him left. A part of him that wanted to fight. "I'm so sorry," he whispered again, and for the first time in days, I saw a flicker of the man I used to know. But the battle was far from over. I wasn't sure how much time we had left, or what would happen next. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to stop fighting for my dad. Not now. Not ever. The following days were a blur of uncertainty. My dad had agreed to listen, finally, after everything that had happened. He told me he didn't know how far Dr. Ross's influence had reached into his life, but he knew something wasn't right. I could see the walls he had built around himself starting to crack, but it wasn't easy. We both had so much to work through, and I knew that we couldn't just walk away from all the damage that had been done in a few days. It was going to take time, and I couldn't afford to rush him or push too hard. We decided that the first step was to stop seeing Dr. Ross. It was hard to get him to agree to it, but after a tense conversation where I finally got him to understand how manipulative this man really was, my dad reluctantly called the office and told them he wanted to cancel his sessions. The relief in his eyes after that phone call made me realize just how much of a hold Dr. Ross had on him. But even though we had taken that step, I could feel the weight of the aftermath pressing down on us. A few days later, my dad sat me down at the kitchen table. He looked exhausted, like he had been carrying a heavy load for too long. I could see the lines on his face deepening, the strain of the past few weeks taking its toll. He didn't look at me directly at first, and I waited for him to speak. The silence stretched on longer than I expected, and just when I thought he wasn't going to say anything, he opened his mouth. "Emily, I don't know how to say this, but I owe you an apology," he started, his voice low and rough. "I don't even know where to begin. The things I've said, the way I treated you. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was fixing myself. But I wasn't. I was just falling further into a hole." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, but I didn't interrupt him. This was the first real conversation we had in weeks, and I needed to hear what he had to say. You were right. About Dr. Ross. About everything. I didn't see it before, but I do now. I was so focused on trying to fix myself, trying to make things better, that I didn't realize I was destroying the very thing I was trying to protect. He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. I thought he was the answer. I thought he could help me, but all he did was pull me further away from you, from everything that mattered. I lost sight of what really mattered. I reached across the table and placed my hand on his, the weight of everything we had been through finally sinking in. I didn't know what to say to that, other than that I was glad he had come to that realization. But I also knew that healing wasn't going to happen overnight. It wasn't something that would magically fix itself because my dad finally saw the truth. I'm sorry too, Dad. I said softly, my voice trembling slightly. I should have said something sooner. I should have fought harder to get through to you. I just didn't know how to break through the walls you built. I didn't want to lose you, but I felt like I was losing you every day. He squeezed my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. I know, sweetheart. I know. And I'm sorry for shutting you out. I should never have done that. The conversation continued, and we talked about everything. About how things had gone so wrong. About how my dad had come to trust a man he had never really known, and how he had allowed himself to believe that there was something wrong with him that only Dr. Ross could fix. We talked about how I had felt abandoned, how I had seen my dad slip away and not been able to do anything about it. The weight of the words was heavy, but it felt like we were both shedding a burden we had been carrying for too long. The following weeks were a mix of small victories and painful setbacks. My dad started seeing a different therapist, a woman who had a reputation for working with people who had experienced manipulation or control in relationships. It wasn't the same as it had been with Dr. Ross, and it didn't promise an immediate fix, but it was a step in the right direction. My dad began to open up more, slowly letting go of the thoughts that had been planted in his mind by Dr. Ross. It was a slow process, but it was progress. The hardest part, I think, was seeing my dad struggle to rebuild trust, not just in me, but in himself. There were days when he doubted his own decisions, second-guessing everything he had done. I could see the shame in his eyes, the guilt that weighed on him. And there were times when I had doubts too. Could we really move past this? Would he be the same person again? Would I ever feel like I truly had my dad back? But one day, about a month after we had taken those first steps to change everything, my dad turned to me, sitting across from me at the dinner table. He looked at me with something different in his eyes, something I hadn't seen in a long time. He looked at peace, like he had found his way back to himself, even if it wasn't all the way there yet. You were right, he said quietly. It wasn't Dr. Ross that was going to fix me. It was you. All along, it was you. I've been so focused on fixing the parts of me that I thought were broken, but I didn't see that what I really needed was you. I needed my family. I needed to let go of this idea that I had to be perfect, that I had to do it all alone. I didn't know how to respond to that. Part of me was relieved, but part of me still wasn't sure if we were truly past it. Could we really go back to being the family we once were? I wasn't sure, but I did know that we were on the right path now. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe we could fix things. Maybe we could heal. The truth was, I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what the future held for my dad or for our family. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to stop fighting for us. Not now. Not ever. The road ahead would be long, and there would still be challenges, but I had my dad back, and that was more than enough for me.